It's very interesting because Chazal say, the sages say concerning human beings, they say, Kashem she'ein partzufeihem doimo zu lezu, kach ein nishmoseihem doimo zu lezu. Means, just like their faces, no two people look exactly alike, okay, apart from perhaps identical twins, but perhaps there's even some distinction over there. But in general, two people don't look alike, and it's a similar thing that we don't have, so we don't even have the same fingerprints. Right? It's very unique. Fingerprint is a very unique thing. So too, the souls of every individual is unique. And you see from all the personalities that each one of them was completely different, but each one of them was beautiful and great in their own unique way. And Rashi was one of them, and I think I came to an appreciation through the study myself of Rashi that I never appreciated that Rashi, I would give him a title that I believe is unique in a certain sense, more so than any of the others, perhaps personalities in many ways that we've discussed up till now. And I'll explain how that works in a moment. Actually, it's interesting. Rashi, out of all the commentators that we've discussed, we discussed Maimonides. Maimonides was born in 1135. So he's the 12th century, he's a 12th century scholar. We discussed Nachmanides, who's fundamentally a 13th century scholar. We discussed then, for example, the Maharal, and the Maharal is a 16th century scholar. Then we discussed the Baal Shem Tov and the Goyim. We're speaking mainly about the 18th century. We discussed Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who is the 19th century. And now we're actually going back. The doctor asked me about the order. There is no significant order. It depends on what I'm feeling passionate about on the day, on the week. Okay. So we're actually going back in time. But I don't feel bad being disordered because even though my disorder has no rhyme and reason necessarily, but the Torah is also written, not in chronological order. The Bible is not written in chronological order. For example, if you look at the book of Numbers, later on it speaks about events, it dates events that happened before events that took place at the beginning of the book. Okay? That's one example in Numbers, and there are many other examples. So the Torah is there to teach us lessons. The not necessarily important. What more important than the chronological aspect is the lessons and the ideals that we learn on. Perhaps it's the same in a certain sense, in a certain aspect. So we're going to speak about the life of Rashi. He's the earliest scholar we've been dealing with. He passed away 30 years before the Rambam, before Maimonides was born. Okay. And Rashi, we call him Rashi, which is an acronym for his name, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak. His name was Rabbi Solomon, son of Isaac. Now, in Hebrew, Shlomo begins with a shin. So Rabbi is a resh, Shlomo is a shin, and Yitzchak is his father's name. So that's how we get Rashi. It's an acronym of Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak. Sometimes Rashi was referred to as, sometimes he's called Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. Even though it's a strange thing that he was called Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki. Right? It's like if your name is Baruch ben Moshe, we say Rabbi Baruch Moshe. It's like kind of making your father's name into your last name. So sometimes he's referred to as Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, but in any event, he was born in the 11th century. Now, just to understand, the Talmud was sealed approximately 400 or 500 years before Rashi. And that's a very important statement. The Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud was sealed, the Jerusalem Talmud was sealed I think a little bit before that, but the Babylonian Talmud was sealed approximately 400 or 500 years, even before Rashi came on the scene. Okay? And that's very important. I'm going to explain why in a moment. I was actually thinking today, when you see pictures of the sages, you see most of them, you see the pictures of perhaps how they looked or were portrayed in their old age, right? You never see, you very seldom see the picture of a sage as he looked in his 20s or 30s or 40s. Right? Okay, we appreciate longevity, we appreciate that kind of old sagely look of old age. Okay.
The Talmud was sealed 400 years earlier.
Yes.
By Ravina and Ravashi?
Correct.
Ravina and Ravashi. So they were Tanoim probably.
No, they were Amoraim.
They were Amoraim.
They were Amoraim. They were towards the end of the Amoraim was Rabin and Ravashi. After that starts in fact another time period. It's a time period of what we call actually some say they were called Spuraim. There was a period in between. Then there was the Go'onim, like Rav Sajagon, Rav Haigon. And then you have the period of the Rishonim. The Rashi is considered a very early Rishon. The period lasts for approximately 400 years, what we consider Rishonim, which means early commentators. Then afterwards, we have the later commentators, starting, in the middle, latter parts of, I'd say, the 15th century is generally the cutoff. So, Rashi was born in Troyes in France, and you can't really see it very well here, but it's about here. It's a little bit southeast of Paris, and it's interesting. I always thought, erroneously so, don't know why I thought it, that Rashi lived in the south of France by Nice, but he didn't. Right? He didn't. He lived much more north. He lived in Troyes. Actually, you'll see it makes a lot of sense when you understand the way he learned. And actually, he lived there. He was born in Troyes, and he lived there most of his life. We'll see a little bit later, but he lived there. Now let's discuss his family background. Come in. Okay, now what's the family background of Rashi? So again, he's born in Troyes, France. He was, we have a tradition that his family was related to Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar. Now Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar was already a Tana. Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar lived about 1,000 years before Rashi. So they said that they traced his yichus back to a Tanaic personality, Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar. And Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, he was from the line of Judah, the line of David. So they say that basically once you can trace your lineage back to Rashi, why don't you come sit over here?
I think.
Best seat in the house. Safe for you. Okay.
Closer, so I can see. Thank you.
No problem. Once you can trace your lineage back to Rashi, you can trace it back to King David. I mentioned that I believe when we discussed the Vilna Gaon, that they could trace it back to Rashi. More or less, once you get back to Rashi, you could trace it all the way back to the Davidic line. Now, his mother's brother was Rabbi Shimon HaZakeh. So his mother's brother was Rabbi Shimon HaZakeh. Now, one needs to understand a little bit of the history, and I'm not going to go further back, but there was a exodus. The Jewish center was really after the destruction of the second temple was in Babel, in Babylon. That's where the Babylonian Talmud was sealed, and that's where the Jews lived. And one of the reasons that the Talmud is written not in Hebrew, it's written in Aramaic, which was the language of the day, the Babylonian language of the day. And, for example, even if a person reads Hebrew, they can't learn Talmud. The fact that a person, for example, just because you're Israeli, you still wouldn't have a clue how to learn Talmud. The one thing has nothing to do with the other. It's a different construct, it's a different language. There's a relationship between the two languages, but the Talmud was written in the language of the day.